Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to the debrief for the 2024 Bahrain Grand Prix. This is new on a Monday. This is weird. This whole weekend has felt very ruddy weird. I'm not going to lie. Jonty's already said it in chat. Race on Saturday, nothing yesterday. Stream on a Monday. You're right, Sean. We are going to debrief the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend, which is obviously the point of the video. But however, it's been a little bit chaotic, as you can probably tell from me still trying to catch up on things this afternoon in the world of Formula One. So we'll try and get to all of that. But obviously, the priority will be to discuss the weekend as a whole, what we thought of that first race of the year. You can rate it in the chat. Let us know what you think. All of that business, all the usual, like a reaction, but just maybe a bit calmer, maybe, and a bit more informed is the idea of this. So I am just going to hop straight into it because so much to get through and say a very good evening to Stuart. Hello, Stuart. Is he there? This is the question. He is there.
Hello.
He's definitely
Once
there.
Again, I've put my settings up wrong, so just give me 2 seconds.
It's all right. we're pros. We're pros at this. I'll tell you what, then. I'll answer the question before I throw it at you then, Stuart. That's the best way to do this. So, the race yesterday, not yesterday, Saturday, this is going to get weird. I thought the first third, if I'm being generous, we could say first half was pretty okay. It seemed to be teeing us up for quite an interesting race. We saw really interesting tight fighting between Russell and the Ferraris, and Perez was in there, and what was going to happen with McLaren, and it felt like we were building to something that never really came, and it was quite anticlimactic in the end, I would say, as an opening race of the season. Actually, first race of the season, or first opening race of the season ever to have no retirements. I mean, that was the kind of race we had. What were you thinking of the race? Did you enjoy it? Did you think it was epic? Epic's probably a bit of a stretch.
It fell a bit flat, didn't it? It wasn't the greatest race in the world, and I think you're right in that it's sort of at the beginning it seemed like it was maybe sort of going to be a little more exciting than it turned out to be. Maybe not for the lead as we've seen over the last 12 months, but for something. But it sort of did kind of settle down quite a bit after a while, despite. Things turning around, people like Leclerc, who had some issues at the beginning, and that kind of settled down a bit and looked like maybe he was going to be able to do a bit more than he was able to. So yeah, not the maybe best opening race of the season. I'm not as cynical or pessimistic as some people seem to be. I think I think circumstances mean there's a lot left on the table for what might happen in races to come, even races to come quite soon, I think. So it's not, I don't think it's all over and done from one weekend, but yeah, definitely. Yeah. Red Bull have laid down the gauntlet, haven't they?
Yeah, massively. Just to let you know, I don't know if you've set up right still, Stuart. You're quite echoey. I don't know if everything's okay your end. Just to double check, it might be me. I don't know if I've got you on twice, but I've got a little bit of an echo. Just to let you know, but I think you're bang on there. Really, I came out Saturday feeling quite flat because obviously the first race of the season, quite exciting. The hype's there. The media had done their best to try and hype it up all winter, and then it kind of came, and it just wasn't a thriller. But I agree with you. I don't think it was all doom and gloom. I think there were reasons to be optimistic in there, which we'll get to. I think we will still do sort of a little field run through sort of the big talking points. So we've got the talking points. We're going to talk about Red Bull, obviously, Ferrari and the battle between Leclerc and Sainz. We'll also discuss Mercedes versus McLaren, which I think is actually both teams. Their speed was masked a little bit by their issues, which we'll get to shortly as well. I also want to talk about RB, as they're known now, of course, and Alpine, and what I've just simply put as WTF is going on at Alpine is definitely what I want to talk about. And we'll also fly through the other teams very quickly with a few notes that I've made for each of them before getting to, I'm sure, some of the talking points chat want to get us to talk to. But Nuke Dukem just said in chat, I rate the 2023 race, the first race of the season, 2023 expansion pack #1. It did very much feel like that, didn't it? And Red Bull and Verstappen, specifically Max Verstappen, absolutely dominated on Saturday. There's no surprise. I was not surprised at all that he won the race. What I was surprised about was by how much. He all but broke the DRS by the end of the first lap and had done by the middle of lap 2. I mean, there's no doubt that the Bahrain International Circuit played to Red Bull's strengths. They're very good on tyre management. It's a tough track on tyres. I think Max Verstappen said the wind had changed direction. That helped the car a little bit, made the car feel a bit better balanced. So it all sort of fell his way, if you like, on Sunday in terms of the conditions in the track. But that takes nothing away from what he did. He obliterated the field and his teammate in let's start the debate nice and early this season in an identical car. People won't like that straight away, but I completely get where the likes of Fred Vasseur are coming from, by the way, when he says that Ferrari they're sort of half the gap to Max Verstappen, and that is a reason for them to be optimistic. But I do not believe, and I'm sure I'm not alone on this, but I do not believe Max Verstappen was flat out. If Max Verstappen wanted that gap to be a minute, probably exaggerating a bit, he could probably do that. I don't think he was pushing flat out. So I think there's a lot of reasons to understand Ferrari optimism for Fred Vasseur and other people's optimism as well, but there's no way that was absolutely flat out from Max Verstappen on Saturday. Certainly post first pit stop, maybe second again if we're being generous. So I think just a dominant display, but lack of surprise from me. Just the gap was quite alarming if you're wanting a nice battle at the front this season. Looks tight behind though, Stuart, to be fair.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just going to double check as I'm talking that I sound better than I did before.
You do. You absolutely do. Sorry. Yeah.
I changed something. Yeah, you're right. Max wasn't exactly pushing for most of the race, apart from when he did his happy little, I'm going to set the fastest lap, which was about a second and a half faster than the next person, Charles Leclerc. So yeah, plenty in hand. But I think, again, he and Red Bull as a package had a sort of flawless weekend, really, but definitely a flawless race. Whereas other people had their mistakes, I want to say. And I think that's possibly where some of the optimism lies. If I don't think we're yet as optimistic as saying that anyone's going to capture him for the championship, but there's still a development race to be had. But Ferrari had their issues, Mercedes had their issues, McLaren, we know that, and I'm sure we're going to go through these in a bit. But McLaren are typically not very strong in Bahrain anyway, and had their own problems. So, and there are people who had slightly worse strategies. Red Bull were able. This is a thing in Red Bull's favour. They were able to use that soft tyre twice in the race, whereas pretty much everyone else doubled up on the hard. So, yeah, they had a lot in hand, and it is slightly worrying. But, if they start to falter, if they have a slightly less bulletproof weekend and other teams are able to get themselves a bit more together, then I think we could be looking at some slightly different races. Bahrain is a little bit unique in a lot of ways.
Bit of an outlier.
Abrasive service. We knew there were a lot of wind this weekend and changing directions a lot, which sort of, I guess, kind of put a bit of flavour on the differences between the cars from day to day. And we're about to go into some faster tracks. I think it's going to take a few races to sort of see roughly where everyone is. But slightly alarming. And I think we're not where we were Bahrain this time last year, but we're very close to where we were at the end of the year last year. It does seem like we've sort of just picked up where we left off, apart from a couple of maybe notable differences.
Yeah, was it Jeremy Clarkson on the grid walk said, "What's everyone been doing all winter?" Because it feels exactly where we were in Abu Dhabi, doesn't it? It does. I think Newt Duker's bang on, like an extension to last season is what it feels like. So, and that's I know, and I'm rolling my eyes as I say it before it even falls out of my mouth, because I know now a lot of people come back to the channel to listen to the post-race stuff. They're not here for the winter, so I make sure I have to do this. We're not slating Red Bull. We're not complaining that Red Bull are winning. We're just saying that if you're wanting a tight fight at the front, it's probably not going to be the season for you, because, and to be a frankly, 2025 as well, probably not either. We'll get onto that later. It may be. We'll see. We'll see. Question mark. But at the moment, as things stand today, you're probably the same for 2025. But it doesn't get away from what I said all of last season. Max Verstappen in that car, conditions, everything worked. It just all clicked in place, and he's just unstoppable in that car. I've got to give him credit. I've got to give everyone who's designed that car and worked on that car credit as well, because don't forget, this is a massively changed car. This isn't just an evolution of the RB19. This is a new concept in a lot of areas. So that's a ballsy thing to do. We said it in testing. Why take the most dominant car in F1 history and make these tweaks? It's a massive risk. And then he rocks up to the first race, 20-odd seconds clear of his teammate, 20-odd seconds clear of the rest of the field. I mean, it really is mind-boggling. I've talked about, I've already sort of touched on this and how I think that Max had a lot of pace in hand. You've said it as well, Stuart. I think a lot of optimism comes from people saying, again, as you've touched on, as I touched on, other teams having issues, and maybe when they get closer, it'll be more interesting. But I still think, even if they were tied behind Max Verstappen, he's got so much more in hand. He's probably still going to be the favourite to win most of these early races. Let's put it that way. Possibly most of the races this season. We'll see how it goes. But I do feel like the field looks tighter. And even if Max goes off and dominates, it may be another one of these years where we have to look at what happens behind with Sergio Perez and everybody else. But on Sergio Perez, congratulations, of course, to Max and Red Bull for the win and the 1-2 on Saturday. It was Saturday. It is Monday today. I'm so lost. Saturday again this coming week as well. I've seen Sergio Perez this last sort of 24, 48 hours described as, and I'll write down the quote, a weak link. That sounds really harsh, and I don't think it was meant in the harsh way it comes across, because whilst he was a long way off his teammate, he still finished in second place, which is where you'd expect him to finish, given that A, he started fifth, and B, his teammate is Max Verstappen. I think he had a decent race, made some nice overtakes, including a really nice switchback move, actually, didn't he, on George Russell at turn 4 on lap 14 for what turned out to be a net second place. So he was racy. He got out there. He was a long way off his teammate, but again, that teammate is Max Verstappen. So Sergio Perez doing what you need your second driver to do. So I think to describe him as the weak link sounds harsh, but I think that's more about if anybody in that Red Bull is going to be picked off by a Ferrari or a McLaren or a Mercedes, it's probably going to be Sergio Perez. I think that was the context of the weak link statement.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And, we talked about him in the same way we used to talk about Bottas a little bit back in the Mercedes days, and that he's kind of basically doing what they need him to do. He's not ruffling too many feathers with Max and causing any discord up at the top. But, if he gets results like this on the regular, then what else do Red Bull really need from him? They don't need him to be a championship contender. They need him to be getting regular podiums and bringing home the points and basically getting involved with the people that are chasing Max as well. Like he overtook George and Leclerc before he got himself up to second place. So that's what they need him to do. They need him to be scoring points and being a buffer. And if we're going to see a Sergio Perez championship contender, then he's got to do that by himself. That's his business. But for Red Bull, they don't think they necessarily need that from him. And he's not, if we're looking at this weekend on its own, he's not doing a bad job. He had some struggle. He had some serious struggles last year, mainly around qualifying, which sort of put him on the back foot before he even hit the track on race day. But generally with the race pace of that car, I think he's doing a fine job so far. I mean, race one. Let's see how he handles when these teams start catching up.
Race one of 24. 30 if you include your sprint. So yeah, a lot of racing to come this year. It'll be interesting to check. I hope he doesn't. It's a long way. If he qualifies around fifth every race and finishes second or third every race, it's not terrible, is it? And I just hope he doesn't hit that lull that he hit last season in qualifying, because that really hurt him. And it's going to be fascinating to see how he gets on against Max Verstappen this year. But again, as we keep saying, I don't think that's the battle. The battle is Sergio Perez is going to want that second in the drivers. If that Red Bull is all conquering again, he's going to want that second place. The team will want him there. So the battle is going to be Perez and everybody behind, which is going to be, I think that'll be fun. I think that's going to be a really fun battle again. I enjoyed that last year. For all the moaning about last season, I actually thought that was a hell of a lot of fun. So hopefully we'll get that again. But again, congratulations to Red Bull. Domination is the only way to put it. I'm going to try and do these in. We've done it. 20 minutes for the first part. Look at that. Bang on. We could do this, Stuart. Come on. Ferrari was the other team we're going to talk about as the other topic. It kind of all fits together, this part. Second best team this weekend. That's controversial at all. They were third and fourth in the race, so good result for them. The notes I've got on them is that it kind of, talking about an extension of last season, it sort of feels very much like a lot of last season already, in that, or Bahrain did, in that Ferrari clearly have the pace over one lap to challenge Red Bull for pole. And I think Mercedes and McLaren, you could throw them in there as well to at least put the threat on Red Bull and be much closer. So I think we need Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz to be picking up a couple of those pole positions to try and give us a fight at the front every now and again in the odd race. So I think they've got the pace. And in fact, I think Leclerc's Q2 time would have been quick enough for pole as it turned out. So clearly the speed is there. But I think the good thing for Ferrari is that the issues they had in the races last year with their tyres and with setup issues, balance and all that seem to have gone. They seem to have the race pace that they didn't have last year. So that's a massive positive for Ferrari. I think that's what Fred Vasseur's getting at, with the gap being half what it was last year. Whether Verstappen had pace in hand or not, he probably still had pace in hand last year as well. So I think they can take a lot of positives from there. And I think Sainz drove really well. I'm getting that in straight away. He drove really well to take P3, some good overtaking. Fantastic couple of moves on Leclerc. I know Leclerc had his issues, but a lot of people putting the bunting out for Carlos Sainz beating Charles Leclerc this season. I've seen a couple of articles saying why Carlos Sainz will beat Charles Leclerc based on Bahrain, where Leclerc had massive issues with his brakes, and I don't think that's a fair comparison whatsoever, personally. I'm looking forward to that fight this season, but I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves if we're talking about Sainz beating Leclerc. He may well. He's had a couple of great seasons against Leclerc, but to take that decision or that stance after one race where Charles Leclerc had massive problems all Grand Prix, to me, is bonkers. I think Carlos Sainz said he had some issues with brakes as well as some management, and that's why he had to get the moves done on Leclerc and the rest of the pack because of concerns over the overheating and things like that. But it's I don't know how anyone looks at one race at Ferrari with that lineup, considering one car problems, and goes, yeah, Sainz is going to smash him this year. It's a bold call. It's a bold call.
Yeah. We get a little bit ahead of ourselves, and I was excited to see Sainz, getting a podium straight away and fighting for some decent points, because I really rate Sainz, and I'm looking. I mean, I'd really look forward to him taking on with Leclerc and trying to establish himself as the better driver in that team, especially as he's got to be selling himself for next year and getting the best possible seat he can. Obviously, Leclerc, at least in the first half of this race, was fighting with a hand behind his back, so the battle between them wasn't exactly representative. But I would like to see more of this, and I hope, even though this wasn't a sort of a balanced fight, I hope Sainz can maybe take some positive energy from this and use it to just keep his head straight going forwards. Sainz isn't one I've seen necessarily get all out of sorts mentally yet. So, hopefully he'll have a good year ahead of him. Leclerc, we know he's a strong and fast racer, and we'll come back from this once they're they've got on top of these car issues. We might not necessarily see this even next week. So, yeah, we could see some good things from Ferrari. They seem to be in a much better place, and I think like a phrase we're going to be hearing a lot and then maybe saying a lot is about the platform these teams have built. The starting platform to build on for the rest of the year. And Ferrari have started off well. They've got good foundations. The car, as you say, manages its tyres a little bit better than it was last year. They seem to have actual race pace. I think the thing about Red Bull, even last year, is they're quite happy to sacrifice, I was going to say Saturday, but I'm going to say qualifying, pace for the race. Like last year, Max gave up pole. I say gave up pole as if he's entitled to it, but you know what I mean? Like, even though he was winning almost every single race, he didn't get all of the poles, and Leclerc and Sergio were allowed to kind of slip in and get those front row slots because they were so confident that they would have the race pace going forwards. But what I think I've kind of noticed is the Red Bull DRS advantage is not as strong, if there at all, this year, because we didn't see Perez sort of breeze through instantly over the first few laps. He did get back up to second because the pace of that car is great, but I didn't really necessarily get the feel that the Red Bull is blitzing everyone with their OP DRS that they had last year. I mean, we'll we've got to have a few races to see that out, but that is that kind of thing that I think maybe might keep people like Ferrari in the hunt if they're able to get a good position on Saturday and maybe hold on to it a little bit longer. We'll see. They got more to play with this year. That's for sure.
Yeah, Sainz only 2.6 seconds off Perez actually at the end. I think Ted said in his notebook he felt like Perez had him covered, but it's still credit to Sainz. And Kyle said in chat that Sainz will be forever underrated. I tend to agree. I've always sung Carlos Sainz's praises, but I'm not going to get the point I was making, as I'm sure you know, Kyle, was just I'm not going to get carried away on one race. A sample size of one race seems a little bit crazy to me. But again, I'm not taking anything away from Sainz. He still drove really, really well. A little bit more on that in just a moment. But Charles Leclerc, suffered some big problems for the first part of the race, and I think probably had to manage it throughout the race. So he said at one stage the car was impossible to drive properly, and that was in the first sort of 15 laps or so on Saturday. Once those issues with the brakes stabilised, they were completely out of the proper window, and apparently it was more than 100-degree split between the right front brake and the left front brake, which meant it was unable to slow the car down, especially at the corners like turn 10, despite braking, I think he said 3 or 4 meters earlier, that the car was listing one way as well. It was just a very difficult, that's 100 degrees in temperature, I believe, by the way, just to confirm that for everybody, but I think it's not a 100-degree angle. That'd be absolutely bonkers. But yeah, no, 100 degrees in temperature, so that's what caused him all the problems early on. That's why we saw him locking up. He lost a place to Russell and Perez. No, he lost a place to Perez, didn't he, locking up and going wide at turn 10. Russell was the lovely move around the outside we'll get to in a bit, but yeah, so he was really struggling early on, which is again why I say let's just calm down on the Sainz versus Leclerc stuff. And as I say, Sainz was having to manage his brakes a little bit as well, which is why he needed to get the moves done and couldn't get stuck in traffic. Clearly not to the same extent that Leclerc was suffering, but it certainly was an issue for Leclerc, and I think he was quite frustrated. I think he said afterwards he struggled to find the positives in the weekend, but I think he can take a lot of positives again from the fact that the tyres, I know it's not going to feel like it right now for him, but the tyres, that problem seems to be sorted. The car seems to have good race pace overall, looking at Carlos, and they've still got the 1 lap pace. So I think Ferrari are going to be a threat at times this season. It's just, hopefully, we won't have quite so many of those brake issues or any more of those brake issues for him, and a bit less of the, okay, we are checking nonsense that seems to get thrown at their drivers all the time from Ferrari. But yeah, he was quite frustrated afterwards. You can understand though, can't you, Stuart? Because clearly, as I say, the pace was in the car because Sainz showed us the pace was in the car.
Oh yeah, clearly, and I think actually, from what we heard from team radio, obviously Leclerc was frustrated, but he sort of basically got his head down and dealt with it as best he could, and the car did seem to come back to him later on in the race. He'd already lost a few places by then, but he came in behind his teammate in the end, which was no mean feat. And I think I'm gonna say something positive and then immediately undercut myself. But I was gonna say, this is a good place for them to be moving forward from. They're in a much better place than last year, and they, I think as they look forward to the next 23 races and 6 sprints, they will. I think they can look forward to getting some good results. Fingers crossed, as long as nothing goes terribly wrong. Now, the reason I'm going to undercut it is, I think we see this at many seasons. We sort of see these teams that have come in early doors. They've made some improvements. They've still got some issues. They've got some, and this is going to be the case for quite a few people we discuss. They're in a good place, but they've got some development work to do, things to unlock in the car to get faster, to get better results. And what they're up against is a Red Bull that have come in at the top of their game immediately, fast, bulletproof, showing very little signs of weakness. So I think we reached a point now in Formula One, at least in this sort of current era, where you just need to come in swinging immediately, or you're just gonna fall behind. As if this race is kind of a microcosm of the season, by the time Ferrari sort of got themselves together, Max was 10 seconds up the road. You know what I mean? And they needed to be, fighting with Max from the very beginning. And Leclerc gave it his best shot into turn 1, but it was after that it was basically gone. So I think I think they're in a good place, but they just need to be in like the best place from race 1, really. It'll be quite funny if we end up, the next 2 races and actually Red Bull are an absolute shambles, and this was all just a one-off perfect weekend for them. But we'll see. After all, we haven't seen this car in any other track.
That's true. That's very true. It could either be two double DNFs, and then a Ferrari 1-2 at Jeddah and a McLaren 1-2 at somewhere else. I don't know where we're going.
Yeah, there we go.
I've got confused. Yeah, it's unlikely. I've realised I didn't put my photos onto loop, so I should just do that very, very quickly. I was just had a thought, which I might come back to later. We'll see. But what? Or I'll let you answer it quickly. We can come back to it later. But what do you think is more important for teams this season? Do you think it is getting that, catching Red Bull and maybe taking the fight to them, or do you think it's more important for them, again, based on one race, to focus on making sure the foundation is bang on, the car develops nicely, ready for next year, because these cars will be used again next year because all focus will be on 2026. So is it, our team's looking at this, and why we're not hearing quite as much pessimism from some teams is that, we're way off, but our goal is to be this close by the end of the season, because then next year will be more interesting. So that's something to maybe consider or think over the next few days for me. I love putting these random ideas in my head, because I'm like, maybe. The other thing I did want to just talk about before we move on from Ferrari is, pushing aside car issues and all of those things, it was great to see, whatever the reasons behind Leclerc's struggles, it was great to see Sainz versus Leclerc, that move into turn one that was, I think, looked closer than it actually probably was. I think Carlos Sainz said he was always under control. The really late dive bomb as well, or what felt like a dive bomb against him in a second overtake, that was so much fun. And that is a scrap I cannot wait to keep watching over the course of this season, because I feel like Carlos Sainz, to steal a Martin Brundle phrase, set his stall out very early on there, and kind of said, look, I'm faster than the guys ahead. I think they gave him the old, we'll come back to you. I don't know if he got a response. I've not checked the team radio for that, so I don't know if he got a response. I don't think he did. He took matters into his own hand, went for the move, and got on with it. I think we're going to see a lot of that from Carlos Sainz this season, because ultimately, whilst he'll still love that team, he'll still love being in Ferrari Red. Of course he would. Who wouldn't? But he has to think about next season. There is a seat open at Mercedes that apparently more people than we thought might be interested in it. There's a seat at Mercedes that if somebody moves to make way and go to Mercedes, that leaves a seat somewhere else. Sainz needs to make sure he is in the forefront of people's mind, doesn't he, and really make those moves on Leclerc. So I think that scrap this season, I hope it doesn't get too contacty. I don't really want to see that as a Ferrari fan, but I'm looking forward to the battle between them, because I feel like that could, in many ways, that could help Ferrari in their battle in the Constructors' Championship to retain that second, or not to retain, to take back that second place. I think that could help them if they've got two drivers going at it flat out as much as you can go flat out in F1 these days. I think that's a good thing. So I can't wait for it. And I love a ballsy move at the inside of your teammate, like we saw from Carlos. So good stuff. More of that, please.
Yeah, and we have to remember Sainz overtook him twice,
yes,
of course, because they allowed Leclerc the undercut. And I'm pretty sure the first time he wasn't particularly aware of Leclerc's struggles, and you could see from the sort of body language of the car that he just, he went for it. He saw an opportunity and just dove for it. It looked like more under control than Leclerc, but obviously Leclerc had his tire locking problems. And I think he knows he's got to just grab results for himself, unless there's there develops a sort of surprise actual battle for the driver's title between Leclerc and Verstappen that leaves Sainz behind. I think Sainz knows there's wins on the table with this car, quite possibly. He's free to grab them, because there's no reason for him to give way to Leclerc, unless that situation arrives, or if they become such a bitter pair of fighters on the track that Ferrari have to tell them to hold position more often than not. But I don't see that happening yet. So yeah, I'd love to see him just go for it the way he has today. If he senses the opportunity, he's not afraid to do it. And as we can see, he's got the ability. So yeah, if that becomes a really interesting scrap, I'm well up for it.
Obviously, every driver will have that streak in them, but I don't really think we've seen it from Carlos. So I'm not convinced he's that kind of driver anyway that would sort of allow the relationship with his teammate and the team to break down. I think he will be that professional who does the job for Ferrari, does the job for himself as well, to make sure he's in the shop window, and then leaves, says bye, probably brings cake on the final day, says bye to everyone, and then goes off to do whatever he does next, wherever he's going to be racing. I don't think he's the kind of driver that's going to go out and stir the pot or there'll be any conflict with his teammate, and I'm looking forward to coming back to this after Abu Dhabi, clipping it up and making himself look like a right arse, because it's been absolute chaos. But yeah, I just don't see that in Carlos' sight. So it's one to keep an eye on, and I hope it does go on for the whole season. Mercedes and McLaren, then we'll roll on to them. Really fun battle to keep an eye on during the race, I thought, Stuart. I quite enjoyed that one. That for me was something that felt like it was going to come to a head at the end and then didn't. Lewis Hamilton, not quite the pace to catch Norris. Norris not quite enough, or not enough time, to catch Russell. And that looked like it was going to brew into something quite nice. They always say look out for the last 10 laps, and it never really came to anything. And that was, I think, the end of the race was summed up quite nicely by the fact we were watching Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo in a battle for P12, for goodness sake. So I think that's kind of summed up quite nicely. But start on Mercedes. Said it was a fun thing to keep an eye on. Both drivers, though, were managing issues. We've kind of touched on that as well. Overheating issues with the power unit. Something... I love Formula One lingo. It's my favourite thing. It's something that we've really had a lot over this winter. So they had overheating issues with the power unit throughout the race, which the team says was caused by, and I quote, suboptimal cooling configuration for the conditions. Car wasn't.
Did Ron Dennis write that?
It's absolutely, I love it. Suboptimal. So there was a lot of managing going on from both the drivers with lift and coast and things like that. And of course, if you're lifting and coasting, you're losing heat from your tyres and therefore performance. So that's probably going to cover where some of their pace went. It's all a knock-on effect in F1, isn't it? It's all linked one way or another. So that's why that is. But despite all of that, I think George Russell had a really good race. He's probably going to be quite disappointed to go from 3rd to 5th, but I think Mercedes were sort of around 3rd place anyway, in terms of outright pace, or it felt that way in the race despite their issues. They were doing a cracking job. Very tight with McLaren. You could argue it either way, I think, 3rd and 4th and 3rd on Saturday. But they were quick, and they were quick on Saturday as well, with Russell there in 3rd place, and obviously Hamilton not where he wanted to be after qualifying. But I think there's good pace in that car, and it feels like a good baseline, which is great for Mercedes and great for us for the rest of this season if they continue to build on that. But George Russell, I think, overtake of the day. I think, or one of the overtakes. Sainz on Leclerc was good, but Leclerc had problems. But then Leclerc also had problems when Russell breezed around the outside of him. That's a word. Breezed around the outside at turn 4. But I think of the overtakes, I think Russell on Leclerc was my favourite of the day. As much as I love the Sainz move, I think it was brilliant around the outside of turn 4. So good to see. Again, like the Carlos Sainz thing, more of that, please. It was just nice to see something that wasn't wholly a DRS overtake. I think DRS was involved, wasn't it, down that back straight, or that second straight, but not wholly a DRS move. So good move for him there. He said, I'll tell you what he said, disappointed not to be able to show the full place of the car, but did say the issues they had is not something to be too concerned about because it is just a case of correcting the cooling configuration. So hopefully they get that sorted, because from what I've seen preparing my preview today for Wednesday, it's going to be quite a fair bit hotter in Jeddah this weekend, so hopefully they'll be able to tackle that one. So that's my thoughts on Russell and Mercedes. A lot of waffle there, but I get very excited when I talk about somebody overtaking in Formula One, because we don't always get cracking overtakes. So a lot of that in F2 though, didn't we, Stuart, around the outside of turn 4? So maybe that's now going to be the line that they like to take for overtaking, which is fine. Love it.
It's a great opportunity there, and it's not like we haven't seen stuff like that before in F1. That's a good little section going down from turn 4 through the next few turns, and Russell's no stranger to that kind of move. So yeah, that was great, and that was the kind of excitement we had early on that kind of made us think, "Ooh, this could be an interesting race on our hands." That kind of petered out after that. I think the cooling issues are an interesting one, especially as it was actually pretty cold. The desert at night, but it was around 20 degrees maximum, I think, ambient temperature. So not super hot. I've got a graphic somewhere, but I haven't got it up right now. And Mercedes said what they did was they kind of went aggressive with their cooling package in that they didn't have enough cooling because they wanted a bit more performance. The more holes you put in the chassis, the less efficient the aerodynamics are. And I think the way Russell put it was, we sacrificed a few places in the race to gain a few hundredths in qualifying, essentially, is what they did. The car just, in long runs, they just started to overheat, which not a huge issue, obviously, for their race, but not a huge issue in terms of the car and the pace and what they can do going forwards. It was interesting that actually both of them seemed very positive on both Friday and Saturday, despite, George had a very good qualifying, but, I think Lewis had, by his standards, pretty poor results from I think what he expects. I mean, pretty, not awful, but not where he'd want to be, especially in the qualifying. But actually, Lewis was also saying that, the car feels like it's a good place. It's got some pace. Again, something we can build on, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think they're generally pretty positive, despite having, these kind of difficulties. I think, we had a lot of testing, many hours. You and I were there. Not actually there, but we covered most of it.
Yes, slightly insane by Friday afternoon, but we were
absolutely
there for most of it.
And they did learn a lot, especially about this track, but a lot of it was during the day. There was, only 10 cars on track. They didn't get a lot of like running behind other cars, a lot of racing. This weekend they were still finding out a lot about what their cars do in an actual race that they couldn't necessarily get from doing sort of mock race runs in testing. So they're still learning, and they're going to learn, how to package these cars properly. And we're going to see more of that. So yeah, I think it's interesting. They seem pretty positive about it, and even though they are sort of clearly behind Ferrari at this point, it's not necessarily going to stay that way. And as you said, they're very close to McLaren, who were solid on a track where they traditionally is a bit of a weak point for them. So
no, I just I'm pondering three things at once. Apologies if I repeat anything you've said, Stuart. Just I look at my notes. Sure. Lewis Hamilton. So he's blamed partially his qualifying performance for his race finish. This is going to come as such an obvious statement, and I know, but I'm going to say it anyway. He feels he would have finished higher had he started higher. I think the fact he was closing in on Lando Norris kind of backs that up, but I don't think we're talking podium or anything like that from us. I don't think either car with the issues they were managing had the pace for a podium. So I think you're looking at in and around where George Russell was with better qualifying. So I thought I'd mention it because it's what he said in his quotes. There was a close call for Lewis Hamilton on lap 35 when exiting the pits. Oscar Piastri kind of went deep into turn one because Hamilton was kind of coming in side by side and wanted to stay ahead, but Piastri went really deep and up on the curb a little bit in the runoff, and Hamilton sort of swooped past to take the position in turn one. So that's probably about as exciting as the second half of the race got at times. But he took the position, disappeared. And like I say, all the excitement we needed in the second half of the race was that closing in on Lando Norris from Hamilton and Norris on Russell. So just to give you an example, anybody who didn't catch the race, on the final lap, Hamilton was 1.8 seconds behind Norris over the line. Norris was only 1.6 behind Russell over the line. Russell's final lap was a tenth quicker than Norris, so Norris didn't really have the pace in the end to get. He needed to be gaining by more than that. But Lewis Hamilton was 4 tenths quicker than Lando Norris on the final lap. So I think another couple of laps, and you're looking at quite an interesting fight there. So it's sort of frustrating when you're watching those times come down and you're thinking, well, Hamilton's catching Norris and Norris is catching Russell, and you go, oh, is this going to be, all right, it's only for P5, but is this what we need to sort of give us some excitement at the end of the race? And then it all just sort of, the flag fell, and I was like, oh, is that it then? Okay, fair enough. But I think that's going to be an insanely tight fight this season. I do think Mercedes are quicker than they showed. I think their problems are masked their true pace. And I think they will be closer to Ferrari. And I think that's the case for McLaren as well. You said it a couple of times last year, it's a circuit that doesn't really suit their car. And when you consider where they were last season in Bahrain, they've taken quite a huge step. But I've seen quite a lot of pessimism around where McLaren are. And I actually think that based on this weekend, there's a lot of optimism, or should be a lot of optimism about what McLaren are versus 12 months ago, and on a track they're not good on. And they managed to come away with a pretty solid double points finish and were, in the mix pace-wise with Mercedes. And I think on a track that does suit them, the car apparently still not particularly epic in the slow-speed corners. So a track like Jeddah could be a really strong weekend for McLaren on a better surface for them, a better circuit and a better layout. I think they're going to be stronger than perhaps Bahrain showed, but I think 12 points for the opening race. I think the first time they scored points in the season opener in Bahrain since 2021. So, that's when you think about the breakthrough they had last year and in 22, that makes sense. But I don't think the pessimism is really necessary. I don't think it's that underwhelming. I get that it does look it on paper when you think about how at times sort of mid-season onwards last year they were challenging for potential pole positions and double podiums and all of that. So I sort of get why some might say, oh, that's a bit underwhelming. But actually, I think there's a lot of reasons to be positive in there. It's also worth pointing out at this stage, they were only about half a second off Red Bull in qualifying, again, on a track they don't really like. 0.531 covering the top 9. So, yes, please. I've mentioned about the slow speed corners, so definitely room for improvement there. I think that's what their development focus is going to be for this year, is very much on getting that car good in all corners rather than just high speed and medium speed. So hopefully that's something they can work on this coming next few weeks, which I think is going to fly by with all the races we've got coming up. So I was quite impressed. I was quietly impressed, but I'm not quiet. I'm still talking about it. So I was impressed with McLaren this weekend, and I'm hopeful for the rest of the season because, develop like they did last year, they're laughing. It's kind of my point, really, I suppose.
Absolutely, and I hope they. I think if they develop as dramatically as they did last year, I think that would be maybe a little bit out of reach, but definitely if they've got room to grow. And they push as hard as they did last year, I think we're going to see some really good things from them. And, you mentioned Saudi being a track full of the fast corners they need to get the most out of this package. We go after Saudi, we go to Australia, which is a lot faster track than it used to be. They turned a lot of those corners. Then Japan, China's got quite a lot of fast corners. So, the next few races, we could see some immediate movement from McLaren up the order. I might be being a bit naive, but I'm expecting to see more out of this car, and there is a chance they could be the second best team this coming weekend, depending on just how good that car is in a more suitable arena. And just as you mentioned qualifying, I thought Friday was really exciting. We haven't really touched it as a whole, but Q1 everyone was covered by about a second. Everything was so tight in a really surprising way. So I think Fridays or Saturdays or whenever they did qualifying are going to be a really interesting watch, even if the sort of races become a bit more Red Bull dominated, which I hope they don't. But yeah, I was really kind of a little bit blown away by qualifying, and actually generally by this weekend compared to what we saw in testing.
I think I'm just going to say, just sort of random point, really. It's amazing, really, isn't it, how the mind works. Just one shuffle forward by one day, a race weekend, how badly it can throw you off. It's absolutely. I was sort of sat there yesterday going, "Is it Monday?" And then today, I thought today was Wednesday, and it's like, come on, Sean, look at your phone. There's a day on there and a date. Wake up! It's 2024, for goodness' sake. No, it's the whole weekend has been weird, but one more of those, and then it's back to, oh yeah, that's right, early starts in Australia. I don't think we're going to get what feels like for, I know, poor Europeans, but I don't think we're going to get what feels like a normal race weekend for Europeans until about Imola, which is going to be weird. But I like a little bit of change every now and again, but I don't think I can get on board with a permanent Saturday race. I like my races on a Sunday afternoon, definitely, or a Sunday morning or a Sunday night. I don't mind, but a Sunday definitely. So. That's my stat. Just a couple of points then. Just to get back to my notes quickly. Lando Norris said was happy with the race pace overall. Clear step they've taken from where they were 12 months ago. He did say, though, that the change of wind direction hurt them on Saturday. So that's an issue. We've talked enough about him closing in on George Russell, just 1.6 seconds off in the end. And Oscar Piastri, pretty close to Norris in qualifying. 1:29.614 from Norris, 1:29.683 from Piastri. So very close between them. I'm looking forward to that fight again this season. But he fell away a little bit during the race, more than 6 seconds back, I think it was. Although, unless I'm missing something, I don't think that's an insurmountable gap, is it, for Oscar Piastri over the course of the season? He had that running wide, which would have cost him some time. That if he did any damage over the curb, nothing mentioned in press releases, so I assume not. But that's a fight I'm really looking forward to this season. So we'll see how they do. But I think, again, 34th time in 10 minutes, I think there are a lot of reasons for McLaren to be very, very optimistic this season. So I'm quite excited for that. So what have we still got then, Stuart? What's still to come? We'll discuss what the hell is going on at Alpine in a minute. I'll read through some bullet points for the remaining teams as well, and we'll take some of your questions and comments. Of course we will, very, very shortly. Before all of that, though, I do want to have a quick chat about RB, if that's all right. That's the former AlphaTauri Toro Rosso team thing.
I've heard of them.
Specifically, Tsunoda versus Ricciardo. And that battle, one race into the season out of 24, got a little bit tetchy on Saturday. So if you didn't see it, late on the drivers were asked to swap positions, but Tsunoda wasn't overly happy about it, having spent pretty much the entire race, I think, in front of Ricciardo, and then Ricciardo cruised up the back of him on softs and being told to let him go. I don't think he was happy about that at all. Questioned it over the radio. In the end, he did let him go, which is fair enough. And Ricciardo went to have a go at Magnussen, but with the benefit of hindsight, it was sort of a pointless call because I think Ricciardo maybe gained by a tenth or two. Never got the move on Magnussen done. It was a really odd call, in my opinion, that where RB chose to make that call. Really strange timing is kind of the point I'm making. And it got a bit funny. Let's put it that way. A bit odd on the final cool-down lap back to the pits where Tsunoda threw his car up the inside of Ricciardo into turn 8, locked up out of frustration, went wide, came back on the track, and they were close to a bit of rubbing. Let's put it that way. They're very close to a bit of a boink of the wheels. Ricciardo had a few things to say with team radio, and a lot of people have slammed Yuki Tsunoda for that. They said it was petulant and immature. My ever the nearly 40-year-old. I've just put it's a little bit unnecessary from Yuki Tsunoda there. I don't think he needs to do that on the cool down lap, but at the same time, I sort of understand his frustration, Stuart. I think he's been in front of his teammate all race. He's then been asked to jump out of the way really late in the Grand Prix where it's not going to make any difference really to anything. Ricciardo then doesn't even pass Magnussen, doesn't really gain much on Magnussen at all, and we end up with everyone where they were except Ricciardo ahead of Tsunoda, which means in what is going to be a really big battle this year. A lot of people see this as the shootout, apparently, for the, I'm not so sure, but the shootout for the second Red Bull seat if they decide to replace Perez. I can kind of understand why Tsunoda's a bit miffed, to be honest. And I just think maybe this is something that, maybe going too deeply into this, I want to do it briefly, but too deeply into it, but something that maybe Lauren McKees and all of that in these new roles at the team, they're settling in. Is this something they're just going to have to themselves learn over time? That, we need to make that call a little bit earlier, and managing the drivers. It's really fascinating lineup, a fascinating dynamic, and it didn't need to boil over like it did, but I feel like it was avoidable, to be honest.
Yeah, there's a couple of sides to this, really, and I must say I think to start with, Yuki's race was managed badly, I think, by the team. His strategy meant, the way they pitted him, he lost positions, both stops. He lost the position to Zhou in the first stop. He lost 2 positions in the second stop to Magnussen and Stroll. So the team sort of allowed him to get undercut both times from, pretty reasonable starting position, to be honest. He got him, and then he got himself up to P10. Now, the thing is that they'd managed to make a strategy Ricciardo work where he was able to get on the soft tires at the end, and he was the only driver to do a 2-stop strategy with softs at the end that wasn't a Red Bull. So I could see how Red Bull RB are like, let's see what you can do with this. We'll move Tsunoda out the way and see if you can move up the field on these soft tires. I could see why they would do that. Even though, he was only in 13th, 12th place, those 2 drivers. I could see why they thought, let's give this a go. To Tsunoda's credit, he did move out the way despite making it very clear he didn't want to. I think it would have been a good idea as a gesture to just make them swap back in at the end, just to show that. That's kind of a class thing you do, isn't it? You say, let's see what your teammate can do and we'll swap you back if it didn't work. Again, there's no points involved, so it doesn't really matter that much. So I could see why Tsunoda was kind of frustrated, because he was just like, well, now I'm stuck behind Ricciardo now. But this is his 4th season now, somehow. And he hasn't managed to dial out this kind of anger, petulance. This the ranting on the radio that was we thought was kind of a. He's a young whatever guy in the first season, but that's still there. His behavior in the cooldown lap wasn't particularly mature. I think this comes down to a maturity thing, and I think even though he's a solid driver, this is a make or break year for him, because RB don't need to keep him on. There's a load of people in the Red Bull pipeline, and if he's difficult to manage, it's going to be very easy for them to get rid of him. He's one of the drivers that are sort of like, could easily be let go with other people coming through. So, and with Ricciardo having a kind of a more mature take on it at the end and keeping a bit relaxed, he sort of had some words to say over the radio, but was a bit more like, I'm going to hold my tongue. He says I'm going to hold my tongue, but also called him certain words over the radio. So it's like
I'm not going to say anything, but
have your cake. Yeah. But if I were to say something, he's the right. I think he needs to learn to just manage his relationship with the team during the race. I know he's not the only one who blows his top over the radio, but he's also, Max Verstappen blows his top on the radio, but Max Verstappen is Max Verstappen. He's got a lot of leeway to work with.
Yeah.
So I think I think he was a bit hard done by but I still think he needs to be a bit more diplomatic about things if he wants to think about his future.
Yeah, before we roll on, just a couple of points to pick up on in chat just to clarify. So first of all, a few people were saying, well, Ricciardo closed 10 seconds on him in a short space of time and was quicker. You're right, but Ricciardo was on soft tyres and Yuki had been ahead of Ricciardo and quicker than Ricciardo for much of the race. So he's going to be frustrated when his teammate then rocks up behind him on soft tyres when he's on the hard tyres and the team say, let him go. So that's that. Secondly, because I love, I have to make the clarification because people like to take a word you say and then twist it into something it wasn't. It's the internet. Nobody has said, as far as I can see, that Yuki was justified in what he did or nobody's condoning what he did. In fact, I explicitly said it was unnecessary and, he shouldn't be doing it. But the point is, you can also, as a grown-up, have two thoughts at the same time and say, absolutely unnecessary. However, I can sort of see why I was a bit miffed. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's, being a grown-up, but there we go. That's all my points for a second. But yeah, the soft tyres on Ricciardo's car, of course, it's going to be quicker, cruising up behind him. So I can see the frustration there. But that's a battle that I don't want to be pessimistic after race one, but I think of all the teammate battles, that's the one I could see boiling over. But that's where the new team principals are going to need a bit of man management, aren't they? They're going to have to sit them down and make sure that because if that car's as good as people fear it is, which I don't think it's quite as quick as a lot of people thought it was going to be. I noticed a lot of the talk, by the way, quieting down after Saturday about Red Bull only 2 teams. But anyway, just making the point immediately. If it is as good as people think it could be, then they're going to need to work together because there could be some big points and some big money up for grabs for the team. So I think just a bit of man management, it'll all be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. Let's be positive. They all love each other.
Yeah, I do think they're going to get this under control. I think it just takes a little bit of a meeting and stuff like that. First race of the season, I think it's going to be fine.
Alpine then. Right. Oh, Jesus. Sorry if I keep sighing, but it's been such a day. So let's do the race stuff first. So we'll do the race stuff first. Qualifying was on Saturday. They were last and second to last, which is really bad. Apparently the car is overweight, although Pierre Gasly said it's not the 10 kg that has been reported. So it is overweight, but not by 10. So it could be 8, something like that. I don't know what the number is. And as confirmed by Ted Kravitz in his notebook post-quali, the engine is also down by 15 horsepower versus its rivals. So that is all a recipe for disaster. As you said, Stuart, on Twitter, maybe they need to strip a bit more paint off. Maybe they'll be a little bit lighter. So the car isn't good. It's overweight. It's underpowered. They were back of the grid. And I don't see any... I don't think many will disagree with this statement. I think if Bottas and Sargeant didn't have the issues they had, I think they would have been last and second to last in the race as well. Just nothing. And it's an absolute mess. An absolute mess. And it's got worse today. In case you haven't followed the news. It was then reported that the technical director, Matt Harmon, and head of aerodynamics, Dirk de Beer, handed in their notice, apparently before the season even started, with Racing News 365 reporting they actually did it before the car was even launched. Bonkers. It was confirmed this morning, though, by the team that they have now both left and a restructuring has taken place within the team. So in just 8 months, Alpine have lost their CEO, team principal, sporting director, racing director, chief technical officer, technical director, and head of aerodynamics. Again, an absolute mess. I'll say what I'll do quickly, Stuart. I'll read this press release because it is, I suppose, it's new news. It's new news for some people, I'm sure, who may not have seen it. So I'll quickly read what they said. I'll just read the... So Alpine today introduced a series of organisational changes throughout its technical team, where it will take a new 3-pillared approach. Very exciting. The team has created 3 specialised technical roles: technical director performance, aerodynamics, engineering, and they've replaced the previous structure having a singular technical director. They've made the decision after a disappointing period of results in the Formula One World Championship, where the team has fallen from finishing 4th in 2022 to 6th in 23, missing several key targets in its ambitions to reach the front of the grid. So it sounds like this has been coming for more than just the last 48 hours. So the team has said that Joe Burnell will be Technical Director of Engineering. Get your pens and paper out. David Wheater as Technical Director of Aerodynamics, and Kieran Pilbeam as Technical Director of Performance. And the three will work closely with Bruno Famin with immediate effect. Bruno Famin said, "We have decided to make these organisational changes. We can clearly see that we are not where we want nor need to be in terms of performance level, and it's time to take another step in terms of organisation and people." We are one race into the new season, and Alpine apparently, despite collapsing last year and trying to sort themselves out, have already collapsed this year and are still trying to sort themselves out. I'll throw the question at chat before I let you have your say on everything, Stuart, that's going on. Very quickly, how long before Renault pull their money? Just a quick one there for you all, because I don't think Renault don't like this kind of thing in Formula One. I've seen many times before when they fall away like this, they soon disappear and become just an engine supplier or rebadge the team to something completely random or whatever. But for the third time, Stuart, just what an absolute mess. And what a way to start the season on track as well. I feel so sorry for the drivers.
Yeah, that car's clearly a mess, a complete mess. I will say, I just offer maybe a more optimistic take on the restructuring. This could very well be a good thing. Like, I think Renault, Alpine, Renault, whoever they are, Lotus, under that shell, yeah. They clearly know something's wrong. They clearly know things aren't working, and even though, as far as I understand it, Matt Harmon and Dirk de Beer leaving was their own personal decision. It wasn't like they were booted out. I think trying a different structure, putting people in different places, and trying to rebuild in that way, it could be a positive thing. We have to see how it plays out. I think sticking your heels in and doing things the Alpine way forever and ever would be more foolish than actually trying to do something different. The three pillar approach, I think, is what McLaren are already doing. So it's not like it's a wild out of box way to do things. So let's hope this kind of restructuring is able to make them move forward from here. I think in terms of this year's car, they're going to have to bring in a B-spec car at some point, aren't they? They can't just keep playing with this one. It's the traction's bad. Yeah, definitely overweight. It's slow, and it's still ugly. The stripping off the paint isn't doing much, is it? And I was thinking about this actually over the weekend. I was thinking that I know in the grand scheme of things, the livery isn't anything. It's like whatever. I know we like to have nice cars to look at, but having that car so stripped of any kind of color does make the whole team look bad. It looks like a team in desperate straits, doesn't it? It looks like they haven't got their act together when they're just tearing the paint off the car and putting out basically a naked chassis. It's not a good look for them. Whereas other cars have managed to put out an entire livery. So they, in terms of performance, in terms of look, in terms of how the sort of structure behind the scenes is going, yeah, they're not looking like a very stable place right now, and we can only hope they sort themselves out. And we need to keep reminding everyone, this sort of 2024, 2025 are kind of a sort of package time period. No one in their right mind is going to come out in 2025 with like a revolutionary car, because they're going to be focused on 2026 by that point. A whole reason that we're seeing a lot of like brand new chassis this year with a new approach and a revolution even from Red Bull is they know they're going to need to develop this through the next 2 years until they come out with the new rules in 2026. This is their base for the rest of this rules period. And for Alpine to come out with this now, the only team from data I saw to have lost pace to Red Bull, every other team has clawed the gap up, whereas Alpine have gone backwards from this time last year. So not great. It's very little positive to say. But at least, my one sort of naive thought is that at least they're doing something. Yeah, like they're doing something, and I hope it works for them.
Yeah, my only thing on the three pillar approach is, for me, that works if your team is stable. It's just a me thing. I think when your team is in the status in Alpine, I worry that three people is going to end up being too many cooks and all of that business. Do you know what I mean? I think when the team is in such a messy situation, a lot more people in there, is that going to cause more problems than it solves? But then at one stage, McLaren weren't stable. So to take your point, Stuart, maybe having this now is what helps to turn the team around, and maybe that will bring the stability. So it could be a case of too many cooks, but it also could be that a fresh pair of eyes will help to find the problems. And if you've got 3 sets of eyes, maybe that's going to help solve the problem as well. So we'll see how it works out. But I'm quite pessimistic about throwing three people. I suppose they split the department up as well, but throwing 3 people into one area, to me, when you're already a mess, doesn't feel like a great step to take. But again, it might be that brings the stability. So we'll see. But it's more, so many people are leaving or have left. Like I said, when I reeled those job titles off, and now we've thrown 3 more people in there, and it's just I don't know what's going on. I hope they know what they're doing, and I'm much more intelligent people behind the scenes at Alpine than me sat here waffling about it. But I hope they know what they're doing, and they can get all this together, and whatever their structure is, whatever their plans are, it all comes together. Because you don't have to be a fan of a team, I don't think. I think most F1 fans want to see 10 competitive teams. We don't necessarily want to see a team cut adrift at the back and struggling. We want to see 3 competitive, as profitable as they're ever going to be in Formula One teams, and that's what I'm looking forward to, and I hope that Alpine can turn that around, because I just keep sighing at it every time I look at the news. I'm just like, oh, what now? After qualifying, after the race, the news today, you think, what is going on? It's crazy for a team that obviously, I think I've mentioned it before, as a Michael Schumacher superstar, or super fan, sorry, Michael Schumacher superstar fan, that team, I've got a lot of love for it. It delivered his first 2 championships for him, so of course I love the Aston team. So I'd love to see them do well, but it's just the way you go. Lion says, we get it, you English are pessimistic about the French team. What a surprise. Oh, English hate the French. God, welcome to 2024. Grow up. I have no problem with the French. They're far more interesting than a lot of English people are, quite frankly. I've been to France quite a few times. It's a lovely place, and I have no problem with French at all. But I'd also like to point out that the French team is based in Aston, in the UK, and it's full of a lot of English people. So, technically I'm being pessimistic about the English people as well. But anyway, it's something I love, is especially when it comes to me, is the English hate the French, English hate the German stereotypes. And it's like, oh, you're new to the channel then, because you know nothing about me.
Yeah.
Big fan of Germany. Just generally as a country, big fan of Germany, and I do like France. So yeah, but that's just the mess at Alpine, and I hope, and I feel as well, Stuart, even for my pessimism, I think I did end there on a positive note, that I hope that they can turn this around. Because if I was hating on a French team, I'd be saying I hope they rot at the back and disappear and Andretti come in. But there you go. Welcome to the internet, 18,942, I suppose.
Right. If you want to look on the bright side, they have got the most to gain.
Yes. No, I like that. Yeah. The only way is up. There you go.
Exactly.
He says through gritted teeth. We'll see how that works out. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to fly through the remaining teams, which are Aston Martin, Sauber, Haas and Williams. I've made a few notes on each team and taken some quotes as well. Then what I'll do is ask Stuart if he wants to add anything to that, and then we're going to come to final points in Q&A. So that's how we're going to do these going forward. So we'll start on this little run through with Aston. I feel like I need some music for this, actually, but I'm not going to do that because that'll just confuse me. So Alonso described the team's race as a quiet one, fair enough, but went on to say the result is probably what they expected, I think, based on simulations. I was surprised by their lack of pace, actually, if I'm being honest. I didn't expect to fight for a podium like we saw last season, but I did think they'd be more competitive. But it is still a double points finish, so that's absolutely something. They did try to leave Alonso out longer in the race to benefit from a potential safety car, but the safety car obviously never came. But I think that was worth a go. You might as well try. I know Dan, we miss you, Dan, used to love Aston Martin staying out long, so there you go. Stroll was hit by Hulkenberg at turn 1 at the start and spun around. I actually have to say did a really good job to come back to P10 and grab a point. Some really good time management and some good strategy as well from Aston Martin. Were big factors for Lance Stroll in that situation that made the difference. And an interesting quote from Mike Crack, who said, "We need a bit more performance to challenge the teams ahead, but this is one race, one track, and we will work hard over the coming days to make progress in Jeddah." Sauber, Bottas tapped the back of Hulkenberg at turn 1, who obviously went into the back of Stroll. That wasn't caused by Bottas going into the back of Hulkenberg, just a knock-on effect of Hulkenberg hitting Stroll and then Bottas hitting Hulkenberg. That did some damage to his front right end plate, left as we look at it, right for him. Didn't appear to affect his pace too much, but in the end it all turned out to be irrelevant because he suffered a 52.4 second pit stop on lap 32 due to a cross-threaded wheel nut on the left front. Valtteri Bottas and his long pit stops, he does enjoy those, doesn't he? So disappointing because I think he was driving pretty well up to that point as well. Zhou drove very well as well and matched the pace of Lance Stroll's Aston Martin for much of the race. He does acknowledge in his post-race quotes, though, that because there was no drama ahead, such as retirements, P11 was the maximum they could have achieved. So if P11 is the maximum, then massive credit to Zhou for getting that P11. Haas, you want to talk about optimism? I'm very optimistic about Haas all of a sudden. Hulkenberg went into turn 1, lap 1 and tagged Stroll, so not so optimistic there. That spun Stroll around, as I've already said, damaged his front wing. For anyone interested, not a penalty for me. That's a lap 1, turn 1 incident, so I don't think if you're slapping penalties on everything, I don't think there always has to be in those situations. 20 cars into a tight corner, it's going to happen. So, but going back to qualifying, Hulkenberg was one of the standout drivers, if not the standout drivers, making Q3 and starting P10. So the 1 lap pace is still in at least Hulkenberg's Haas. Magnussen was able to hold off the RBs at the end, as we've already talked about, to take P12. He said in his post-race quotes, the car is not necessarily quicker than last season, but the car is better on its tyres. And that, overall, is why I'm positive about Haas and what Haas needed to see this weekend. They can surely take so many positives out of this weekend. The focus in testing, as we know, Stuart, having watched constantly those cars going round, was on solving those race tyre issues, and they've largely done it. I know Ao Komatsu has said that degradation is still not the best, and they certainly didn't drop like a stone during the race like we saw in much of 2023, at least. Sorry, Hulkenberg, not as a result of tyre degradation anyway. But they were able to fight and actually weren't a million miles away from the top 10 again when we're comparing to last year. And last but by no means least, maybe, it is Williams. Logan Sargeant had a big front right lockup at turn 4 and spent a fair whack of time parked up in the runoff area with his engine still running. That lockup, by the way, was caused by an electronic issue, and I watched the video that James Vowles did, and it was really interesting, and he explained that the drivers are frequently adjusting what's happening with the brake bias and how much the brake migrates forwards and backwards, and there's like a rotary dial that allows them to be able to do that. And in that circumstance, what happened is that all of a sudden all of his brake bias went right to the front, and that resulted in the big lockup, which of course then meant he ended up with a flat spot, so he had to pit. And when he came into the pits, he put a new steering wheel on as well as a new set of tyres. So really interesting stuff there, a bit of insight. I hope James Vowles does those, or I don't know if he did them last season, but I hope he does them more this season, because I like James Vowles for one, but also nice to get that insight. And Alex Albon had what seemed like a pretty quiet Saturday. Team were managing issues throughout the race, and were both running power units at their temperature limits, a Mercedes power unit, interestingly enough, of course. That meant, as Albon explained, they were down on power. He also went on to say that the car feels okay, although they are far behind, but relative to the teams in the midfield, the pace is quite similar. And he added, and this is a quote, we had issues the whole race with things that... try again. We had issues the whole race with things that if we had done more running in testing, we would have been able to avoid. So I think a lot of us said after testing, didn't we, Stuart, that actually Williams not getting so many laps in. They were late with the car, not to testing, but in general late with the car. Wasn't going to have a knock-on effect, and clearly still a few teething issues in there. But I know that was a lot of information to take in, everybody, but I don't want to dwell too much on teams further down the grid, because it's usually just a few notes and bits and bobs that we get in the press and press release as well from the drivers. There's no point sitting here for 25 minutes talking about them. But is there anything, I still want to talk about them because they're part of the grid. So but is there anything you want to add to on, what does it say, Aston, Haas, Sauber, Williams and co, Stuart?
Yeah, I'm mainly going to reiterate a couple of things that you just to agree with you. I think Stroll had a really, really good race. I think it's easy to overlook that. Stroll did great. So let's hope we have more of those. And he's no broken hand this year. Zhou, I think, had a great race. Like he basically had two brilliant undercuts through both his stops. He stopped early both times and made up a lot of places and was able to hold on to most of them. Which is why he did so well. I think you touching on 11th being the best he could finish is a sort of interesting point, because I think if these cars remain as sort of bulletproof throughout the season, like we haven't really mentioned it, but we had all 20 cars finish at the first race, which is wild. Again, I think the gap between the first 5 teams there's a little bit of a gap after that to the next team. So, there's a risk of them hogging all the points if we're not careful. The finishing order ended up being like a little bit Noah's Arky, like not quite perfect, but we had the 2 Red Bulls, 2 Ferraris, Mercedes and McLaren kind of entangled. Then the 2 Aston Martins, the RBs were together, the Alpines were together. So, I think you don't necessarily always see that at Bahrain. So that was interesting. Yeah. And I think I got to reiterate on Haas. I'm really made up for them. Like they seemed just to be on stealth mode in testing. We didn't know, they didn't really try and do anything interesting. They sort of just kept going round and round and round, doing really measured laps. So I wasn't really sure what we were going to see when we got to actual competitive sessions. And the fact they've got some pace and they've much better got their kind of race pace and endurance under control is really heartening to see. And hopefully they can now move forward instead of just chasing gremlins. So yeah. So basically kind of reiterate, just kind of underlined a lot of what you said, but yeah.
No, that's fine. It's good to get your perspective on it. I think the Haas thing, like you say, we're watching and testing, thinking, lap after lap, and not really exciting. But actually, again, I think as we said in testing and thinking back now and looking at this weekend that's just gone, that's what they needed, wasn't it? To get those laps in there, understand the tyres with the car. It's really good to see them turning that around. I hope that they're going to be more competitive this year. But the point you made on the points was also made by where are you in chat? Ethan in chat, and I think Ted Kravitz made a similar point about the Noah's Ark feel of the field. Ethan says Stroll being able to recover from last without a safety car really shows where F1 needs to update its point system. Going to be very hard for midfield teams to score points without any problems up front. And just back to the Ted Kravitz point, Ted, as you said, Noah's Ark, you've got Red Bull 1-2, Ferrari 3-4, let's say Mercedes 5-6, McLaren 7-8, Aston Martin 8. I've gone wrong somewhere, but 2-2-2. That's your 5 teams, top 10. No points if everyone finishes, is there? So there's going to need to be drama for your likes of Sauber and co to get the points. So I don't know about updating the point system, but it is just something worth highlighting this year that maybe, last year Haas were crowned the best, worst, last place because of all the points they picked up or something like that. So let's hope that they pick up some points, but I won't expect to see too many for those back there. So that's it. That's your grid. And that was going to be a final stat, by the way. This is the first season opener where not a single driver retired from the race. Sainz, by the way, won driver of the day, and fastest that went to Verstappen 1:32.608.
Very nice. I will just going to quickly add something that just amused me slightly that I saw. I don't know if you saw this, a clip of after qualifying, Stroll just kind of turning to Alonso and saying, "Aren't you glad you left Alpine?" Which cheeky but funny.
Right then, if you have any questions, now is your time to pop them in chat, or any points you want us to read out, anything you think we missed that we really should have talked about. These aren't reactions as they used to be. These are now debriefs. So we're not here to tell you everything every single car did. We're just here to talk about the weekend as a whole and everything else happening around Formula 1. So any questions, get them in the chat. I'll come to them in just a second. Thank you, everyone, by the way, for tuning in. Interestingly, pretty much exactly the same concurrent viewers live that we'd have on a race reaction on Sunday. So the couple of people who felt the need to get really nasty with me on Saturday because it wasn't a race reaction and saying this was a stupid idea, I think I've proven that actually whether I stream on Saturday after a race or on a Monday evening, it doesn't actually make any difference. The same people are going to come. So thank you, everyone, for your support. If you are new as well, please do subscribe. It'd be great to have you on board for the season. And don't forget to leave a like as well. Thank you to Rixis for your super chat. I'll come to that in a moment, mate. We'll do some questions. And that's really all I want to say. So thank you very much. I've quite enjoyed this. It's been a nice. The problem was, Stuart, reactions was just me sitting for 2 hours going, just see the press releases come in. It's been so much more fun, so much more enjoyable as an F1 fan to be able to just watch the weekend and watch the action and then sit down and watch the highlights. I've watched this race, by the way, twice and the highlights twice. The things I do for you lot, seriously. To be able to watch the race, go through press releases, look at some articles from people far more knowledgeable than me, look at what the team... It's just been so much... To put a proper stream together and still be able to put our opinion across as well has just been so much more enjoyable. And talking to somebody else as well is always a help because it allows me to gather some thoughts. Definitely. So I've enjoyed it, so it's been good fun. But I had a question for you and it's gone.
Oh no. Well, I keep thinking about it.
Who are you? What year is this?
What do you think? I'll just agree. I think this is good because we've done it. We've done the analysis. We've seen it. Got all the takes, got the press releases, and as well, the people in the chat like us have been able to kind of sit with it a little bit and have a think about it rather than come hot off whatever's just happened. And we can sort of be a bit more reflective and knowledgeated, informed.
Knowledgeated and bros are the two words today for you. There we go. While we're doing Q&A, by the way, just on screen, we'll have some top shots from Bahrain from XPB Images. It's what they call their favourite or some of their best picks from the weekend. So top shots from Bahrain by XPB Images. XPB, of course, do provide the images for, or most of the images for, streams and videos and things. So shout out to those guys. They are brilliant. And give them a follow on social media. Wink. Definitely worth giving them a follow over there. They share some photos from the weekends and things as well. So let's do this Q&A then before I start waffling away. Rick says, thank you again for your super chat. Says, rumours about Max leaving Mercedes in 2025. Again, just rumours, but some reputable sources are claiming that. Chamber, love to hear you. Thumbs up, says Rixis. So thank you very much, Rixis, for your super chat. And Nick Surface as well. Thank you very much for yours, mate. Good to see you again. Says, so how is this budget cap sliding CFD scale working out? F1 ready to ditch them yet? I know they never will. So thank you very much to both of you for your super chats. We'll start with Rixis because his came in first, of course. Obviously, I will come to you all in chat. If you want to get a burning question off your chest, feel free to pop in a super chat, but I will always try to come to you in chat. So don't worry if you can't or don't want to. But we've got to talk about the Max rumours because, wow, have they come from nowhere. So I think it all started. Jos Verstappen was seen talking to Toto Wolff, and of course, if one person exhales near another in the paddock, that means that there's a signing on the horizon. But, and I saw that and I was like, oh yeah, all right, whatever. Get lost, not happening. And then it did sort of, a few more, like Rick says, a few reputable sources starting to say that whilst nothing has been decided and this is all very much speculation and early stages, it's not completely beyond the realms of possibility. And I thought again, yeah, all right, whatever. But then I realised, Stuart, I think I spent the last 2 years saying, yeah, right, whatever, about Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari. So, I mean, anything can happen in Formula One, and it usually does, as Murray Walker would say. There you go.
Drink.
But what got me thinking is, when you look at behind the scenes at Red Bull at the moment, and you look at what I love, by the way, that Ted Kravitz just calls it the situation. When you look at the situation, when you look at that, you think, yeah, I can see Max is probably a little bit fed up at what's going on. But also something just about sort of specifically the track stuff. 2026 onwards, we've got this new power unit regulation coming in. And whilst Ford are very experienced in their field, let's put it that way, it's still a risk for Max, isn't it? Because they've not built an F1 engine for a long time. Red Bull powertrains is still very new. I know they've got a lot of Honda people on board, but it's still a very new thing. So Red Bull powertrains, Ford working together, it is a bit of a gamble. Whereas Mercedes, who have already shown back in 2014 what they can do with a new set of engine regulations, he might look at that and think, well, yeah, I could win the title. I mean, he's probably going to win it this year. Possible chance in 2025, but 2026, maybe not. But at Mercedes, I might be able to win 26, 27, 28. He might be thinking more long-term with how many titles, and others have talked about maybe, to be a true legend of F1, whatever that bloody means, you need to win titles at multiple teams, apparently. A bit like Schumacher leaving Benetton in 95, I suppose, to go to Ferrari, but at the end of 95, obviously, for 1996. But I think when you start to sort of piece a few bits together, you can see why actually it's not impossible. But as we sit here today, so as of 20 past 8 nearly on Monday evening on the 4th of March 2024, because it could all change by tomorrow morning, I'm not convinced it's going to happen. Certainly not before that regulation change in 26, because he'd have to give up a pretty damn good car and a very good chance at being a 5-time world champion by the end of next year.
Yeah, and that's kind of the crux, isn't it? I think ultimately, Max is obviously going to go where he thinks the fastest car is going to be. Right now, that's Red Bull, and I think you'd be foolish to think next year that's not going to be the case as well. I think that that's the best place for him with all the information he knows on securing titles over the next couple of years. But you are right. 2026 becomes a bit of a mystery box, and we don't know what Ford are going to do, and to kind of extend it a little bit into rumor territory, but they're you know, we know that Ford publicly showed some discontent with the situation and how it was being handled, and it's become more possible that Ford might get cold feet if things continue to be a little bit discordant and chaotic. And I think the discordant and chaoticness is kind of what's driving a lot of this. And we know that I think Jos Verstappen, who has also been very vocal, is using this kind of to his advantage. He knows Max is quite heavy leverage, because I think you could argue Max Verstappen might be the most valuable person in that whole team. And if you can start spreading the idea that Max might go elsewhere if things aren't resolved to satisfaction, and then you could see why other partners might be getting jittery as well. So I think that's what's attempting to be set off right now, especially from people like Jos. So we don't really know what the truth is, but I think there's a lot of Red Bull really need to get settled. I think Red Bull really need to kind of prove they're kind of one way or another draw a line under the things that are going on in a way that is satisfactory to a lot of people around them, their partners, their drivers. Jos Verstappen is not just some guy. He's quite influential within that team, and especially with Max. So I think that's kind of a thing at play here. I think realistically, this is all a lot of gamesmanship to try and oust Christian Horner from his position and things like that. I think that's what's happening, and using Max is the easiest way to do it. So, but having said that, we know there's a vacancy at Mercedes next year. We know they're very good with their engines, and they've got they are well built up to come at 2026 head on. It could easily be a smart long-term move to maybe sacrifice a little bit in 2025 to get 2026, 2027, 2028 possible, if Mercedes can prove they're going to be able to hit the ground running with that, as they did with Hamilton 11 years ago, 12 years ago. So it's not impossible, but I wouldn't place any bets while the whole situation is as chaotic as it is right now. But I think, compared to a month ago, compared to 2 weeks ago, it suddenly seems a lot more of a feasible thing to happen.
I think as well, we heard a couple of weeks, or last week, didn't we, from Ford, who weren't very happy. And maybe if you're Max Verstappen, you look at that, and let's say Christian Horner stays, Max and Ford say, well then, no, we're pulling out. Max Verstappen suddenly look at Mercedes going, actually, we probably really ought to go somewhere with a bit more stability there. But what I would say is that and I mean this with all due respect to any driver I mention after this, by the way, I'm not taking shots at anybody, but if you're Toto Wolff and you're looking to replace Lewis Hamilton, your first port of call, again, with respect, is not going to be Pierre Gasly. It's not going to be Alex Albon. It's going to be, hi, Max, are you interested? And if Max says no, then you go and start to talk to the drivers, because he is right now the best driver out there in the best car. And you go and ask, you at least, Toto Wolff would not be doing his job properly, in my opinion, if he didn't at least ask the question. He has to at least ask the question. And even if he's given the middle finger by Max Verstappen, that's fine. He can move on. But that's how I view it. And I will say as well, by the way, sorry to be a bit of a bitch about it, but if Max Verstappen goes to Mercedes, I am filling up my DeLorean. Stuart, you can come with me. We're gonna switch on that flux capacitor. We are going back to December 2021, and we're telling everyone that Lewis Hamilton moves to Ferrari and Max Verstappen goes to Ferrari to Mercedes, because that could be bloody hilarious. But anyway, who saw that coming? Seriously. So yeah, that's. I think at the moment it's just all, like you say, a bit of a power play. But there are factors going on that make you think, as you say, Stuart, that maybe this is slightly more plausible than it was 3-4 months ago. So it'll be interesting. But yeah,
I will. I'll say two things. And neither of these are controversial. I mean, the first thing is that if Hamilton goes to Ferrari and Max goes to Mercedes next year, that's a season worth watching. My goodness me, how exciting that would be! Forgetting everything else, all the other stuff that's going on, that would be quite a sight. Secondly, obviously Max is contracted to 2028, but there's no way that he signed such an enormously long contract without a lot of ways out of it, a lot of break clauses, whether it be the car's underperforming, whether it be the team's throwing his reputation into disrepute. There's got to be a lot of ways to get out of it. Lots of contracts, especially contracts with very, very valuable drivers will have that. So, it's not, if things go weird and south with Red Bull, Max can find his way somewhere else. I'm sure of it.
I also realise I'm such a nerd as well, by the way. We're filling up the DeLorean. It was that
your audience knows.
Unwrapping the TARDIS. Just a point actually that Raoul makes, which is a fair point. Says just to point out, Ford is majorly doing only the battery and electric motor side of the PU with some PU work, whatever that means. He says, see their press release back in February 2023. So just worth making that point as well. Nick Surface, back to his super chat, says, so is this budget cap / sliding CFD scale working out? F1 ready to ditch them yet? I know they never will. I think this. I've look. We've had this debate. I won't go into it too much. Nick, you've been here, mate. You've heard my stance on the cost cap, but I think the sliding CFD still has more wiggle room to work. I think it can work, and that is the way to do it for me. I know everyone's tied to the same budget, but I do. My concern with the cost cap remains, and we're seeing it a little bit now, that it doesn't give teams who need to catch up the money to be able to catch up. And I'm not sort of looking now, is the CFD disadvantage of winning the championship enough? Or is it just, Stuart, that gap is so big that Red Bull have got in terms of performance that you'd need a ridiculous amount of money to be able to close that gap, and they are just maximising every part of everything. It's a really difficult thing to, which we'll not get into too much, but I'll let Stuart have his say on that, but we'll not get into it too much again. But I know there's a lot of debate around the cost cap, the CFD thing, and also actually whether these regulations work, because I think there was some concern after the weekend that actually these cars are harder again to follow.
I'm not. I'm a little bit more positive about it. I think it would be well worth us reading more about what people have to say to it, or even, God forbid, talking to to people in teams about how they actually read the situation. But let's not forget, it's a pretty competitive field. These cars have kept quite tightly together in terms of performance year on year. They're not drifting apart. Red Bull have a very competitive package, but they are not necessarily like pulling away from everyone. All the other teams are sort of staying in reach with each other. I think that some of that has to come down to the provisions they've put in place. It's very hard from an outside perspective to know exactly how it's affecting what we're seeing and how much of it would be this way anyway. But I think the Max Verstappen effect with that car is sort of exaggerating the uncompetitiveness of the field, or is actually, I think I saw a TikTok over the weekend that said how to watch F1, and they just put a sticker over Max's name on the timing tower. But it's true. If you look at the rest of it, it's pretty tight as it was last year. So I think in general things are pretty good. And I think some of this work on the CFD sliding scale and the budget caps and things is doing some of that work. But I might try and go out of my way to talk to some people and see what they think about it on the inside, if they're willing to say anything.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I don't want to get into it too much because it's something I've talked about a lot over the last few years on the channel. But there is something before we get on to more questions that I meant to mention as well, news-wise, that came out a couple of hours before we went live. It's not something I'm going to delve into too much this evening because it is, to be fair, it's a good report. But I just want to wait and see what happens over the next few days and weeks before really digging into it too much. But just to let you know, and I am going to try and not quote it completely, but this is from BBC Sports, Andrew Benson, of course. The FIA president is under investigation for allegedly interfering over a Formula One race result. So a whistleblower told the FIA that it's Mohammed Ben Sulayem, isn't it? Yeah, allegedly intervened in to overturn a penalty given to Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso at the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. So this time last year, pretty much, getting on for, a bit early this year, aren't we? But the claim is in a report by an FIA compliance officer to its ethics committee, which has been seen by BBC Sports. The allegation made by the whistleblower is the FIA president and the FIA's vice president for I've lost where I am now. Adverts, even on the BBC website. It's not an advert, it's a TV thing. I don't care. Yes, I have a TV license. Why does that bloody matter? I'm reading an article. Why does it matter? Oh, goodness me. So basically, Alonso being given a 10-second penalty for work done on his car whilst he was serving a previous 5-second penalty, if you recall. And the report by compliance officer, I'm going to butcher this, Paolo Bazzari, says a whistleblower reported that Ben Sulayem pretended the stewards to overturn their decision to issue the penalty to Alonso. And the Italian word pretender means to require or expect, so you need to overturn this penalty. I expect you to overturn this penalty. Ben Sulayem has refused, or not refused, compliant was not responded to requests for comment, neither of the FIA, so we'll see if that develops in the next few days, see what's going on there. But the ethics committee is expected to take 4 to 6 weeks to issue its report. The penalty was because Alonso finished third, didn't he? Then got a 10-second penalty, and that bumped Russell up to third, I think. That's Stuart. That's off the top of my head. Help me quickly.
It was something like that. He dropped. Yeah, he dropped back because he was penalised for his team touching the car in a pit stop while he was meant to be serving a penalty. Yeah,
Russell would have been third. Yeah. Yes, it was. Yeah, so Russell would have been third. Yeah, just to confirm that. So again, don't want to get into it too much because there's not a lot of detail out there. Just the one article. Maybe the FIA will come back at this, but it's what it is, Stuart. Super quickly, is another controversy in the F1 paddock as we head into another race weekend that was already going to be dominated by the situation. We're going to have this as well now. It's much like poor Alpine. It's a messy start to the season for F1 and the FIA. Is my kind and slightly, let's try and not get into it too much tonight, jovial way of saying it, I suppose. But yeah, an absolute mess. And I know. I'm sure
it's such a weird thing as well.
Yeah,
it's like such a weird, small little thing. Like I don't. If true, I don't know why he would. I don't know. It's such a weird. Yeah. But yeah, I think Mohammed Ben Sulayem has a little bit of a problem of just getting involved in these controversies. It's happened quite a few times now, and it's not making him or the FIA look great, I must say, during sort of the time he's sort of been president, which is unfortunate. There were some reports over this weekend about him trying to coax Max Verstappen into publicly backing Christian Horner, and which is also a weird thing to do. And I think that BBC article as well just has a few things of it that he's sort of mistaken little controversies. I'm going to put mildly. He has over the last few years. So yeah, it's not a great look. I got to say, even though it's a small thing, I think he had that issue, didn't he, where people were starting to get annoyed with him meddling in Formula One and sort of getting involved where he shouldn't be. And he did say he was going to step back. I think it was the start of last year, wasn't it? He said he was going to step back from being sort of super hands-on with Formula One and take a back seat. Despite the fact that we see him constantly at F1, he's constantly right there. But so I don't know how hands-on he is getting himself involved in a way that's not so publicly obvious. But yeah, it's hard to know what to say because this is quite fresh reports, isn't it? And we've only got that sort of one thing going on, and it hasn't been sort of investigated and stuff like that. So at least it's not a huge, race win overturning kind of issue. It's not a sort of thing that would like throw championships or race wins, or it's not a Singapore 2008 kind of issue. It's a sort of relatively small one.
Yeah, I get that. The only trouble is though, it potentially sets a precedent, doesn't it? If you can do that for a third place penalty for Fernando Alonso, what else could he do? I guess is the concern from people. So we'll see what happens there. I was going to say something then. I was going to make a joke. I will make the joke. Why not? It's definitely not a conversation I want to get into, but it's the Ben Sulayem stepping back thing is a bit like Prince Harry. Stick with me. Ever since he's retired from frontline royal family stuff, I've seen a lot more of him and heard a lot more from him than I did when I was actually doing that. So I was kind of like, okay, fair enough. The book and all of this other business that he's done. Whereas Ben Sulayem, I'm going to step back from F1, but I've seen a lot. I feel like I've seen more of him and heard more from him since he stepped back. So maybe he got bored and just kept having to get involved behind the scenes. I don't know. There we go. We're not going to say any more on that with the Royals because. That's a whole other can of worms. Let's do some questions in chat. So I'll let you speak, Stuart. I'll just have a look for some questions.
Yeah. I'll just go quickly. I feel like the Jean Todt era was actually quite unusual in how behind the scenes he was. Like we didn't hear very much from him. We saw him sometimes because obviously he's representing the FIA, but we didn't see him like loads. He didn't seem to be interfering in a very obvious like personal way, and I think that was sort of actually a little bit of a blip in the way that the FIA presidents have tended to act. We know how Max Mosley was. We know how I forgot his name, but the FISA guy before Max Mosley that almost blew the whole sport apart with the rows he was having with people. Balestri, I want to say. Yeah. So actually, maybe we're just back to business as usual with the FIA president being a little bit of an ego, let's say.
I should also stress as well, when I say see more of, I don't mean I'm popping out for coffee every Friday with Ben Sulayem and Prince Harry. That's a meeting and a half, isn't it? We're off to Starbucks, lads. Oh, let's not do this again. No, get the Hovis music. The Yorkshire accent's out. I'm sorry. Questions then. Let's have a look. So a lot of people talking amongst themselves, which is good to see. Helps to keep the community growing, hopefully, and actually being quite nice to each other. I'm trying to avoid not the questions, but the comments around certain questions. As you'll know from some that you deleted during testing, Stuart, there are some obvious jokes out there that are not really necessary. But I did see one from Raoul that I wanted to read that was just to note the Alonso penalty was for touching the car, literally touching the car. It's wrong, very wrong, but it was a 10 seconds and precedent. So just so you know. It feels like F1 and the FIA are like church and state. Church is doing a bunch of stuff and state has no idea what they are doing. Fair enough. CPV1. If Andretti got Porsche engines, would that help get them into F1? Asks James Rich. I think any kind of manufacturer backing from what we're trying to say from the outset of their time in Formula One. So if they've got manufacturer backing and then put an application in, and they'll be using that manufacturer backing from their first season, I think they've got a better chance, because that whole report thing that F1 put out, was a lot of that was, if you're going to use a Renault engine, it doesn't look good for the sport. We don't want that, and it doesn't add value. So I think if they can come in with the backing of either General Motors or a Porsche, I think it strengthens their application. Would be my answer to that one, I suppose. Not necessarily would help them, but would strengthen it. But no guarantees, Andretti. But back to Alpine. If Alpine have had enough and Renault pull the plug there, maybe Andretti can buy that and run Renault engines for a couple of years. But actually, kind of putting the question and the point together, actually, just came to me randomly. On Alpine, what they could really do with is a customer team. They could do with another 2 cars running those engines for data gathering and all that sort of thing, couldn't they? Really?
Yeah, they are out there on their own, aren't they? They're funny, Renault, aren't they? They sort of they do tend to fall a little bit behind with their engines quite often. But yeah, having more cars out there, doing more laps, getting more data, always helps. And no one seems to want their power units, because over this whole hybrid era, they've just sort of been a bit second rate, really, haven't they? And I don't think their relationship with Red Bull really helped how they looked either by the end of that.
It's no. No, not many. No. Let's leave it there. Black Hawk says, if Red Bull Racing does start to implode, do you think Merck might go to Newey with a blank check? Back to our DMs earlier, Stuart. His error with the engines could be a force to be reckoned with. I think if Adrian Newey were to leave Red Bull, whether it be end of this season or whatever, I think there's quite a few teams that are going to be after him. And I think Mercedes could be one, but Ferrari might fancy going and grabbing him. That Newey to Ferrari tie has always been there, hasn't it? Or the link. But I don't know if there's some sort of clause. I suppose if he leaves his contract, it doesn't matter. But I seem to recall a few years ago that Newey was offered that contract at Red Bull to extend so he could work on, was it the Valkyrie or something like that? The car that they were building, and that he wouldn't necessarily have to work on the F1 side of things if he didn't want to, and it was to stop him going to teams like Ferrari. So I don't know what rules are around gardening leave and things like that there, but it wouldn't be a smooth transition, that's for sure. But that was the other thing as well, Stuart, the Helmut Marko clause, going back to the Max Verstappen stuff, when you mentioned breaking contract and things, and the potential clauses that apparently reportedly rumoured, whatever you want to say, gossip, speculation, that there's a clause in the contract that if Helmut Marko leaves Red Bull, Max Verstappen can leave at any time. So,
wow. I
guess
we'll never know if that's true. Unless Helmut Marko leaves.
Helmut Marko leaves tomorrow, Max Verstappen leaves on Wednesday, then we certainly knew it was true. No more news, please. Let's all calm down. It's been crazy this last few weeks in Formula One for good and very bad reasons. What are your thoughts on Audi possibly delaying their entry, says CPB1? Did you want to say something, Stuart, before we answer that?
I was just going to say on Newey. I mean, well, I've got a non-controversial thing and maybe a more controversial thing. The first one I think is, yes, I agree. I think the Guardian leave is going to be significant. So if you do want a Newey, you're going to have to wait for that to kind of feed into your design team. I will also say, and I've been thinking about this over the last month, I think obviously he's one of the greatest designers sort of F1 has had. He's been around in many eras and produced many World Championship cars. I do also think possibly he's a little bit overhyped. Like, I'm not saying he's like bad, but I'm not saying he's bad. He's obviously very, very skilled and very valuable and adds a lot. There's a clear reason to hang on to an Adrian Newey. But a couple of things. One, he is part of a team, obviously, and there are people working with him, and there are people in Red Bull, I think, who are maybe made a little bit invisible because of how big his cachet is and his name is. But other teams have very strong designers and have brought out very strong cars. I think, the question was about him moving to Mercedes. I think Mercedes have a very, very strong design team, and they obviously, they won 8 championships in a row. And I don't necessarily, and Adrian Newey has gone through many periods of time where he hasn't produced winning cars and has sometimes produced duds, or has had, taken a while to put a package together that he can sort of build and develop over years. He's not always bringing out the very best cars, him and his team. So if you were Mercedes and you had faith in your design team and who you have working on your cars and the kind of pipeline you have there, I don't know if you necessarily want to bring in an Adrian Newey at the end of his career to disrupt that. Is my thought. Like, I'm not, when I say I think he's overvalued, I don't, there's no shade on him at all. I just think in terms of, is he going to be the magic bullet that will solve all your problems and change things around? No, is how I view that.
I think the initial statement made me go, but I think no, you're fair on that, because you're right. There's a whole team there, isn't there? Now it's not just one man anymore, and actually, Moray says he's all sort of, as you were saying, end of his career. He's also almost at retirement age. How much time can he really have to turn a team around to his methods? So, there's a lot of things to consider there. But I think if Newey was available, most teams, regardless of age, would at least get him in, even in an advisory role or something. I think they try and get him in because, why wouldn't you? But yeah, it's a bonkers thought, isn't it, that this even rumor or not is floating around at the moment. So what was the question we got about Audi, weren't we? CPB wanted to know what the thoughts Audi possibly delaying their entry. I thought that had been cleared up. CPB, I think Sauber, Aluni Bravi came out. He did say it in the preview. Aluni Bravi came out last week and confirmed that Audi was still committed to an entry or taking over in 2026, and everything's continuing as normal. So obviously that's not a I mean, it's as close as that you're ever going to get from a Formula One team saying yes, everything's carrying on as normal. But there's always that. It's wording. It's when someone says, "Well, that's not my intention." That doesn't mean they're not going to. It just means that's not my intention. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. So I don't think Audi will go. So or Audi will back out just yet. But 2 years. They're going to have to make a decision. Whatever, they're going to have to decide what they're doing next 6-8 months. Really, Stuart. It can't be something that can rumble into next year because Sauber need to be deciding what they're doing in 2026, don't they? If that's the case, so I think Audi will be here for 26, but a decision needs to be pretty swift.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think things are still tootling ahead. I think it's one of those things where they like to stir a little bit of drama in the pot, but I think we're kind of, if not past it, we're fast approaching the point of no return, where you either have to you have to either have to be in or be out, don't you? You can't just sort of be twiddling your thumbs about, oh, am I going to have my F1 entry in 2026? This is, you're sort of in building up time now, aren't you?
Yes. I'm going to read a couple of comments and then we're going to wrap it up for the evening because we've overrun by 15 minutes, which actually, that's not bad. Really. Cited Canvas says Alpine could do with a bit of speed and power. They're talking about Jeremy Clarkson in there for reasons that only the chat will know. Fill in the blank says we now wait for the Twitter experts to take everything out of context for clout. Quite. Remember when this is why. Remember when you was classmates with Clarkson, stole his designs in school? True story. Says Cited Canvas. John Whitaker, hey John, says I agree with Stuart. I think people see Newey as the genius, and sure he is, but he's not the only designer they have, and they never get mentioned. So that's a fair point. Kevin says, say what? Bow down to Newey. Fair dues. We've talked about that one. Alpine have been screwed by the poor enforcement of the engine freeze, says Moray. And let's have two more very, very quickly. If it feels like I've read that one, the Church State one, and I think we're going back too far now, really. So the Merc numbers on the front of the car are too hard to see, says Random. I thought with Ferraris, you can see the numbers, but when you're looking at a distance, I think they're a bit too, they're not distinctive enough. So
yeah, agree.
Yeah, I think that's a big neon signs above their heads. And it'll tell us what's going on. But that's it. We'll leave it there, Stuart. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. Lots to go through, considering everyone was telling me on Saturday, don't waste your time. There's nothing to talk about. We've easily filled an hour and 47 minutes, and I think we could probably go for another hour and still not cover it all. So thank you very much. It's been good fun, and look forward to doing this again with you next week. Don't forget, race on Saturday against Stuart. So a couple of days after we'll be streaming.
It's all very confusing, isn't it? But no, I look forward to it. 23 races to go, so don't write off the season yet, everybody. In fact, I'm going to end my point of this podcasty session stream thing by reminding people of what you said during testing, is that F1 Twitter and fans are very susceptible to recency bias.
Yes.
So just remember, there's a whole big season ahead. And goodbye.
I love it. I'm sure we'll talk soon. Thank you very much, Stuart. Yes, thank you to Stuart. Thank you to all of you guys as well for tuning in. Absolute pleasure to have you with us. As I say, these are going to be how we do things for the next few races, and then we'll decide as a community which way we go. But given that the numbers are basically what they were anyway for reactions, I'm quite happy doing this. Much more fun being able to sit and watch the race again and work on some stuff and be able to bring you a bit more, slightly more informed stream, but still with all the waffle and nonsense that we throw in there as usual, because, it wouldn't be the F1 word if we didn't have waffle and nonsense. Part of it. We love it. I will be back on Wednesday with the preview for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Just to confirm, from the Australian Grand Prix onwards, they will go back to being Thursday And with the races being on a Sunday, this will feel a bit less detached from the weekend because obviously we'd be live the next day. So Thursday, Sunday will be your race weekend content with the odd stream thrown in here and there when things get exciting, or if we want to do something post-quali, we'll see. But that's going to be the bulk of it for the season. So we're back on Wednesday, 4 p.m. GMT with the preview, then the stream again this time next week, 7 p.m. GMT to debrief Saudi Arabia. There will be videos out throughout the season with some more feature stuff, some video essay style content I want to do. So please do subscribe if you're new. It would be great to have you on board for that. And don't forget to drop a like before you go. 174 likes. Can we get that to 200, do you think? 26 more before you go? Go on. You know you want to. Get that to 200. That'd be amazing. It'd be greatly appreciated. And you can follow me on social media. The F1 Word on Instagram and at F1 Word on Facebook and on Twitter as well. Don't forget as well to subscribe to Stuart's channel if you haven't already. Link in the description to that one. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean. This has been the F1 Word. And until next time, goodbye.